This is Susan, and it is so good to have you guys here today. The question that we're going to answer today is podcasting dead? I really think this is something everyone should be considering. Just considering is, do I need a podcast in my life? Here's why you want to consider it before you jump in. And let me just make sure I'm clear about this. Podcasting is a lot of work. It does take a good bit of time to create just one episode in a way that will bring value to someone. So if you know me, if you've been to any of the shows or any of the things that I've ever done, you know that I am all about strategy, that I don't believe you should ever do anything without thinking through the strategy of why am I going to do this and how can I execute on this in the best way. So as I started to think about today's episode, I actually dug up my SOP, which is Standard Operating Procedure, which is what me and my team follow whenever we're producing an episode. And I created a list from that SOP of all of the tasks involved. And these are just the big tasks involved in producing every single episode. So let me just run through that list with you, just to bring some context to what we're talking about here. When you think about the investment of time, first you have to pick the topic, right? What do you want to talk about? What thought leadership do you want to bring to the table? And you got to do a little bit of research. Like, what angle are you going to come at it from? You decide on that angle and then you write an outline. And that's the part that is the beginning of the process. It's the part that I'm most involved in, as well as deciding if I'm going to do it by myself or if I want to find a guest and schedule some guests with me. And then once we do that, then it's time to record. And so you're recording, you hand the recording over for post-production to get cleaned up and create a good either audio or visual representation of what your thoughts are. That takes a little bit of time, a little bit of effort on somebody's part, and it could be a financial investment as well. Now, after it goes through post-production, then you have to upload the episode to whichever podcast server you're using. Libsyn is one of the first ones that is ever out there. There's tons and tons more. I use Podbean, love it. It's easy to use and it's very inexpensive. So those are some of the things that you do as you prepare to put out your podcast. Now the back office stuff comes into play. It's like, how are we going to get people to know about it? So then you start creating graphics to promote it. And then once you've created the graphics, you have to create an episode page on your website for certain, because you want it to live there and help your SEO. I love creating audiograms. I use wave.co for my audiograms so that I can put it out on social and have something with movement to it and some sound so people can get a snippet of the program. So you create an audiogram. And then obviously you're promoting it on your social channels and you want to send it to your current list. That was like 12 steps right there. And all you've done is just the tip of the iceberg on what's necessary to really have a successful podcast. And it's so funny because when I first started thinking about podcasting, this list of tasks was not on my radar at all. I thought about the glamorous part of it. Turning on the mic and sharing everything that I've learned over the last 20 years, then just putting it out into the ethernet and just like, people will find me. If I make it, they will come. Not true. Not true at all. And I found, here's the funny thing. I've been podcasting for a couple of years and I wasted a lot of time because I could have been doing more. I was doing all those things and yet I could have been doing more. So I do want you to think about, I call it the ROE, return on effort of doing a podcast. And don't be intimidated. I don't want you to be thinking I'm saying all of this because I don't think anyone should do it. That is not true. But I want you to consider some things. There's 2.4 million podcasts out there. And they're broadcast against multiple platforms, but at least on Apple. And 48 million episodes. That's what you're up against. That's what's out there for people to choose from. So the question is that if you're going to put out a podcast, you need to have a really solid strategy on how you're going to promote it and how you're going to get people to see it and become aware of you and what purpose do you want it to serve for you. You have to be really clear on that or you're going to get swallowed up in those statistics. And there's even more to it because, sorry, don't mean to be Debbie Downer here, but less than 20% of podcasts make it to their second year. Less than 20%. So what we're talking about here is 80% of the people who put all of their passion, their love, their attention, their time, their resources into podcasting Don't make it. I don't want you to be one of those statistics. And that's why I ask, when you see a statistic like this, you're like, really? Is podcasting dead? Is it something that only the behemoths can sustain themselves on? You look at the Mel Robbins and the Brene Browns and the Tony Robbins and all of these huge influencers who are just like grabbing up millions of views and millions of downloads. And you say, oh, but I'm just a small fish. Maybe podcasting's dead for me. Maybe it's not worth my time. I would ask you to consider this, that done well, you do not have to be part of this statistic. Sorry, guys, it's backwards on my overlay. You don't have to be part of that statistic if you consider doing it properly. I want you to really think about this for a moment. I want you to consider this concept because it's an important one, and it is what slowed me down in the growth of my podcast initially, because I was not paying attention to this principle. So I want you to anchor your mindset around what it takes to run a successful podcast with this concept in mind. I think you need to think about spending equal amount of time between producing and promoting your podcast. Equal amount of time. If you consider it from that perspective, and you put a good strategy in place on how you will promote it, I do believe that anyone can be successful in podcasting as long as they are a thought leader that has something to say and enough content to be able to have a conversation on a regular basis with people. So those two things, are you willing to take the time to promote it after you've gone through the process of producing it? And do you have sustainable content? That things that you talk with your clients about all of the time. That's where most of my podcast content comes from. It's like I have amazing conversations with my client, and then I'm like, I've got to talk about that on the podcast. And especially when the conversation comes up with multiple people, I'm like, oh, this is too good to hold back. I've got to share this out there because people need to know this. So if you've got that kind of information and you're willing to put the time and energy into creating a great promotional strategy, I do believe that podcasting can be a great way for you to put long form content. You know what I mean by long form content, right? It's a big body of content. You put that out once and you can micro it down into multiple things. So you've got good stuff to share, but you got to find places to share it. And so that's where we're headed. Let's dig into this promotion thing. Let's talk about it from actually two perspectives that I have. The first perspective is the one that I think is most common. It's the one I thought of initially, and the one that my SOP, the list that I shared with you of tasks that I do, it comes down to this. I believed that I was doing a good job promoting my podcast and adding value to my current network. I know that sending out an email to my current subscriber list, yes, that's totally promoting it to my current network. And then posting it on LinkedIn and other social media platforms and groups, etc. I thought I was getting out there and trying to find new subscribers and trying to expand my network, but I really wasn't. Because what I found was it was a onesie-twosie thing. Like I put the audiogram out on Instagram and I'd get a few new followers. It was nice. And I would get people to listen to it. But I don't believe that those translated into people going and finding my podcast and actually listening to the full episode. I didn't see the statistics on my podcasting platform indicating that there was an incremental increase in listeners and in downloads week over week, right? I was doing okay. And the podcast was growing and there was nothing wrong with it. But it was not actually expanding my reach, which was my number one goal for the podcast. That's actually what brought to mind sharing this with you, because the biggest difference here is that I was really focused on building relationship and just working within my current network. The people who knew me. And I'm like, oh, good, I've got some really good stuff to share with you. I've got some good value to add to you. But you know what I wasn't doing? I wasn't selling the podcast. I'm a sales coach. What? No, I'm serious. And then it brought to mind my favorite sales movie, Glengarry Glen Ross. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it, but it brought to mind good old Alec Baldwin's quote from that movie, always be closing. And when you're in sales, that is actually what comes to mind more than anything, is that you always have to be having conversations with new people and helping them understand who you are, what you do. If you're not getting out there and expanding your network, you're actually in an ecosystem. And so you don't have the opportunity to close someone, in essence, bring them closer into relationship with you. So you're not getting the reach that you would really like to have. The last thing I want to talk about really quickly before we move on to the second way to promote it is that even within your network, you want to make sure that you are promoting the idea in a way that draws people closer to the next step of the relationship with you. For instance, if you put it out to your email list, make absolutely certain that you are connecting the topic of your podcast episode to a story that you can share with them that relates to why they would want to come a little bit closer to you and perhaps explore another free offering that you have, an event that you have coming up, a program that you're offering, right? So use that to sell people to the next step of a relationship with you. Don't just put it out there and say, hey, I've got something new for you today. Go out and listen to it. It's really good. Let me know what you think about it. Believe me, I've done that. But it doesn't get you where you want to go. So creating the messaging around your podcast, even to your current network, is a selling opportunity, but you're selling a warmer audience and you're selling them to the next step of the relationship. The next step that we want to go to that actually changes things a lot for us is when we talk about expanding our reach and visibility outside of our current network. In order to do that, you've got to get in front of people who are not currently connected to you. As I mentioned, you can try to do that on social media. You can try to do that in your Facebook groups or into different things, but it's really hard. And I call that fishing. If my clients are listening to this, they're going to be laughing. Actually saying the words right now, they'll be like fishing with a pole instead of fishing with a net. Right? Because it's almost like a onesie twosie. You put it out on social, you might pick up a follower, you might get a little of engagement, but one at a time. It doesn't happen in droves, not until you're at that influencer level, right? Which most of us aren't. But consider this. There's other podcasters out there who also want to expand their reach. And they have an ideal client profile or an avatar that is similar to yours. Can we say podcast swaps? That's what I call it, a podcast swap. See, a lot of people that I talk to are looking to be a guest on a podcast. And I can tell you right now, as a podcaster, I get endless requests for someone to be a guest on my podcast. Endless. I honestly turn 99% of them down because I have a very strong network of people that I consider, I support them, they support me. I work within my network to promote people and to put them on my podcast. So unless you're someone who is in my inner ring of community, chances are it's going to be hard for you to get onto my podcast. However, if I receive an email that says, hey, I'd like to do a podcast swap with you. How about this? We'll put you on my podcast. I'll go on your podcast. Here's the angle that I think that we could take on it from both perspectives. They make it so easy for me. And my immediate response is absolutely yes. Absolutely. That sounds fantastic, right? There's such a big difference between reaching out to somebody and asking, can I be on your show? Here's what I want to talk about. And all this silly stuff like they've actually looked at your podcast. But if somebody reaches out to me and says, I got an idea. I think this would be really awesome for us to promote each other. Holy cow, that to me now is what it's about when you think about fishing with a net. Because now this person has given me an opportunity to be in front of their audience who I've never had exposure to before. They're giving me that exposure. They're endorsing me as someone they believe in. So it's a warmer connection. And they are then going to come onto my show and do the same thing. So it's an equal give and take. That's the kind of business transaction that will make a difference for your business, for your podcast, and for you personally. Because it feels good. It feels like you're talking to people you know. I just want you to consider that podcasting is not dead. I really don't think it's dead. But I do believe that you have to expand the way you think about podcasting and have a strategy in place for it because of the effort that you're going to put into it. It takes time, but done well, There's almost nothing that can be more gratifying than having a podcast. It does give you a level of credibility when you can say, I've got, I think I'm on episode 53, which is nothing. I mean, there's people out there with hundreds of episodes, right? But I made it past that first year, made it past the second year. I don't do it every single week, but I do it very often. And I've gotten better at it. There's always room for improvement, people, always room for improvement. Even when you're someone who, this is like my business, right? So I want you to consider that podcasting can be an amazing enhancement to your visibility strategy, but there has to be a strategy behind it. And I think there also has to be some real consideration to how it's going to fit into your workflow and how you will be able to manage the additional tasks. I have a team that helps me, and it's not expensive. You can find resources to do things for you. It doesn't add a ton of money expense-wise for you. I personally believe that time is actually your most valuable commodity. As a business owner, I don't want to be working 7 days a week. I'd prefer to be working 4 days a week. So if I'm going to add something like this to my workflow and my work stream, I'm going to do it in a way that's smart. And that's what I really would love to help anyone out there who is thinking about starting a podcast or considering taking their podcast to the next level and creating a more solid strategy. That's what I do for my people, is we just look at every aspect of visibility and we say, hey, how can we put this podcast at the center of your visibility strategy? And then what do we build all the way around the edges to utilize the effort you're putting into that? Micro it down into more content. Reach out to who is that person? Who are these other advocates and people who could be good partners to you? And how do you approach them to make it a win-win situation? I can so help you with that. And it would be a ball to do. So consider reaching out if there's anything that I can do in that respect to help you. And if I could ask one other thing, I would love it if you would take a look at Unstoppable Women in Business podcast out on your favorite podcast platform. It's on Apple, it's on Google, it's on Spotify. I think that's the major ones. I've got some really good episodes out there, so it would be a pleasure. And enjoy it. Please subscribe. And if you don't mind, leave a review, because you know how those algorithms are. For more people to be able to have access to it, it has to have that kind of acknowledgement. So that would be a wonderful thing you could do for me, and I would appreciate it. The last thing I would have to say is I also put my podcasts out in visual format. Did I tell you we were going to hit the top of the iceberg today? We didn't even talk about the video portion of podcasting, because that is an amazing way that you can repurpose. So this LinkedIn Live show today, right? It's on LinkedIn. It's streaming on Facebook. I then have my production people clean it up around the edges, put a YouTube acceptable beginning and ending on it, and we put it out to YouTube. So it's a visual representation of what I've done here today, because I'll tell you what, I love LinkedIn. It is my professional network. It's my network of choice, but they do make these LinkedIn Live shows hard to find. And technology-wise, it doesn't always turn out the way you want it to. So I tell people, head on over to my YouTube channel. It's Unstoppable Women in Business also, but you can find it if you Google Susan Trumpler. I've got tons of good resources out there as well. So people, podcasting isn't dead, but podcasting without a strategy, dead as a doornail. Do it, but do it right and get the results that you're looking for. This is Susan again from Unstoppable Women in Business. I hope you have an amazing day, an amazing week, and let me know what I can do to support you. Take care.